Hi everyone, my name is Erica White and I am with the Ashland Soil and Water Conservation District. Today we'll be hearing a little bit from Craig Houin with Sunrise Cooperative as part of our Conservation Chat series. He's going to talk a little bit about crop modeling, specifically the field forecasting tool and AdaptN. Our office has been partnered with Sunrise for about 2 years to bring these models and working with grant funding at no cost to Ashland and surrounding county farmers. Craig's going to tell us a little bit more about how these models work and how they can help you make your management decisions on the farm. We do expect our funding to roll into the 2022 growing season, so if you are interested, feel free to contact our office and make sure that you follow us on Facebook for more conservation chats and upcoming events. With that, thank you, and I will pass it over to Craig.
My name is Craig Houin, and I'm with Sunrise Cooperative, and I'm Data Innovation Lead with Sunrise Cooperative. And I've worked with crop models since about 2015, started a little bit in the fall of 2014, and just continued to grow and evolve my knowledge on these models, and found two models that work extremely good in our part of the country, and honestly, they work everywhere if you put the work into it. And what we found with crop models is that there is quite a bit of work involved with it, but if you take the time to put good information into models, you get good information coming out. Garbage in, garbage out, just like with anything else. I want to start off with a model that I have less experience with this one than I do with field forecasting tool, but it is still I still really enjoy using this model because of the depth of information that comes out of it. And this is AdaptN, and AdaptN is currently owned by Yara International, which is a fertilizer company, and they're international in scope. And AdaptN was originally a Cornell model. If you remember or ever heard of the Cornell nitrogen model back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, they've been at this game for quite a long time and really evolved the information that goes in and also the information that's generated from the model. It is a static model, meaning that you predict what the yield will be. You plug it into the data set, the configuration as I got on the screen right now, and it builds everything based on your target yield. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on how we use AdaptN along with field forecasting tool to help each of those models perform better. But right now, I just want to give a little bit of background information on AdaptN. And when we start a field, and this is a demonstration field that the plat was supposed to be at today, and it is a really good field with regard to soil fertility, and also in soil productivity capabilities. It's not always been exceptional, but it's always been a good field. And but just you're not going to get the 220, 240 bushel yields off of this field that you see in other parts of the state. But when you look in regard to the geography that we're in, it's a productive field. It asks for all of these different inputs, and as you can see, a lot of them are optional, but they still have an impact if you decide to put those in. Nitrogen applications and manure applications, I feel that these are not optional. They are required fields to make the information more accurate, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But a lot of the information too can be pulled from Surgo data. So soil type being one, we have an opportunity to sync to a source, which is Surgo. We could enter in a constant value on soil type, which is something I've not figured out because I don't know of too many constant values in soil type in Ashland County. But another way to do it would be to upload a shapefile. So if you have a different source of soil type information, you could update your own. And you can see I just synced a source with this, but I do have it set at 100%. Soil slope is another one. It doesn't really impact the model as much, with regard to nitrogen management, but it does help when you look at the weather information that goes in the background and timing of applications in relation to those rainfall events. So if you're spreading urea over the top as a broadcast form and you get an inch of rain and you have a 6 to 8% slope in there, there's a good opportunity that you're going to move that urea to different parts of the field or even out of the field. So soil slope does have an impact. Organic matter is a big impact, and most of the time I upload my shapefile, and I use this from soil test information using grid soil sampling or zone sampling. Another new source of soil organic matter, and I say new, it's about 3 to 5 years old now, really prevalent in the last 3 years, is Precision Planting Smart Firmer data. And using data in the background and navigating through the data that comes out of the display, and being able to contour or surface that organic matter layer coming out of Smart Firmer, powerful tool because it gives you a truly spatial map of soil organic matter. And CEC is another one that falls into that. That's very, very powerful when utilizing it for models. Prior crop is critical. It's very straightforward. This is a soybean. It's already been updated. But so that's why it says to select crop now, but I'm going to leave it the way it is, but I just want to make sure that you see that that is an option. Expected harvest population, expected yield. These are the two areas that were based on, some prediction on the part of the grower and the agronomist. And expected yield in my eyes goes to historic yield. And you always want to bump that a little bit. Always try to do better every year. So I use historical yield and then add about 5 to 10% depending on the weather that the year is predicting out. But I also use the expected yield and I couple it with field forecasting tool. And I'll share this real quick. Is I could look at field forecasting tool and I'll show it to you in a moment, but I could adjust my yield up by percentages or I could do it by bushel. As long as I know what my initial expected yield was inputted at in the spring, then I could adjust it from there. I could decrease it or I could increase it both percentage-wise or by bushel. And that is a real powerful tool in helping fine-tune adapt N. Tillage method is critical. When you look at whether it be conventional, vertical, no-till, strip till, whatever the case is, that's a very input to have in. So it's really important to know what you did. And I say that not from a farmer as much as far as your agronomist, making sure that everybody is on the same page and entering this information in as correctly as possible, because there is a big difference between no-till and doing a fall and a spring tillage. Both in, it's more in the way of the nitrification and the nitrogen cycle and that conversion and what's going on within that soil, and also some of the environmental impacts of tillage. So it does change the configuration and the profile quite significantly between those two practices. As I said too, nitrogen applications are important, and you could view the previous applications in this form and make sure those are correct. So this particular field, we have a starter mix, side dress, and a pre-plant. So we have pre-plant ammonia and came back in and did urea ammonium sulfate blend, and that making sure everything is correct within this is always true and important. And manure, big deal in this part of the state is the availability of manure. Manure acts differently than commercial fertilizer. So having these factors put in and making sure we have everything correct is really important. Application date, whether or not it was incorporated, and also the amount applied, and that could be in gallons or tons. It also asks for your ammonium and your organic N, and this would come from the manure analysis. You could also use stock values on this, and also the moisture. So it's a big difference between liquid hog manure and dry chicken litter in what nutrients are available and what's going on with that. So these are the basic parameters, and these are the ones that I shoot for, making sure I hit all these. Another one that is good to have in there is soil pH. It's not a big mover in the model, but it does help in fine tune some smaller things as far as and availability of nutrients based on the pH. Emergent state does not change too much, but sometimes models will calculate out what the emergence is, and we may have a geographic anomaly where the emergence is either before or after the predicted date. So that being able to correct that is really important. One thing with this model AdaptN is it takes into consideration cover crops. And this is a newer feature over the last few years, but the research work done within Cornell and within Yara International to make sure that they have a good understanding of the impact of cover crops on nitrogen is really quite impressive. And they've done a great job in incorporating this. It doesn't really affect the model dramatically, but it does help fine tune your nitrogen. And I say that it doesn't affect it dramatically. It doesn't affect it dramatically on grass cover crops that are terminated, either prior to or right after planting. But when you look at a legume crop, it does make a big impact on the nitrogen of the nitrogen needs of the cornfield to achieve the expected yield that has been inputted. So after all this is taken into consideration and everything is entered, you have 100% along the side, you can come into a field recommendation, and this is what the report will show. And this calculates every day. So I could come into this field and say, let's say it's June or July or even May, and it'll share with me based on my applications, the weather that hit this field, the requirements to achieve the expected yield, and also uses a nitrogen efficiency number, which is typically nitrogen use efficiency. And we have it calculated at 1.1, but that could be changed. So if you're doing a later season application, you could make it 0.8 or 0.9, and it'll adjust the rates needed. This field currently does not need any nitrogen. It's saying that our maximum is 30 pounds of N per acre, our minimum is 0, and our average is 1. If I ran this earlier and I had the same numbers, I ran it earlier for July 1st and I had the same exact numbers that I have here now. So it didn't change too awful much. And it's just a nice, easy way to understand the needs of the field. You also see that this is a spatial map. So the nice thing with AdaptN, and this is one I really enjoy, and a lot of people on the team that I get to work with enjoy, is that we can create a variable rate map to go across this field. And if you have your soil information in as far as soil types, your organic matter, which is variable, your slope, all those things, will go in and make a truly variable top dress, side dress nitrogen application map. And this could be exported right out of the tool and loaded into your spreader through the display, and it'll create that variable rate map, assuming you have the capabilities of doing variable rate with your spreader or your applicator. Most retailers in our area have that capability, so it's not a hard issue for them to understand. The other thing it does is it breaks out your numbers here very easily. You can see most all the whole field is at 0, and we have a few small spots out here that ask for a little bit. The information that comes out of it is rather in depth. So it's showing that we do have some N mineralization. That's a natural conversion and working. Total N loss is a big deal also. So we've lost 87 pounds of N on average across this field. And that's not an unheard of number. And it's actually a little bit lower than typical because of the rainfall we had here in 2021. We had some good timely rains, nothing excessive for the most part. We've had some heavy rains from time to time. But when you look at total loss, it's not that significant at 87 pounds for an average. Total uptake is at 153, et cetera, as you go through this. Another more detailed is it's showing you your average population and your minimum and maximum population. And this is at harvest, and this is at estimation. And it also gives us our yield breakout and shows what's potential out there. So that's just on the surface, and that's actually a quick print type PDF that you can look at, you can save, you can do whatever you want to do with that. One nice feature with this is that if I go in and I click on an area and I view details, it's showing a lot more information. So in that particular spot, right in the center of that field, it's stating that our nitrogen status is 231 pounds of N in that crop at harvest time. We've applied 166 pounds of N, or have 166 pounds. So there's between now and black layer, which is not that far away, we're looking at another 65 pounds of N to go into that plant. We have 65 pounds now in the soil, so that's good. We should have a net zero if everything plays out right. But we've gotten a lot of other good information that we could dive in and look at very deeply and get a better understanding of what's going on. Sometimes it feels like information overload, but as you dissect these numbers, and they've done a very, very good job of giving you good help points within the model and help explain some of the reasons or some of the meanings behind these numbers. So those are all good points and things. So with that, there's some opportunities, like I said, to dive in and make this field, or make the information in the field, a little bit more accurate. And we've coupled with Sunrise Cooperative, we've coupled up AdaptN with field forecasting tool because of that. And I want to show field forecasting tool. This is the same exact field. And you can see here, it will predict out a yield. This is not a yield that I would run to my grain marketer with by any means. And I don't mean that to be negative to the model. I mean that to be that you got to keep in mind that the model never looks at the field. And in so being that it's taking information from weather models, it's taking information that we input into this. It's taking information from a tissue test that calibrates the model. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on how that works. But it takes all of that in, and then it gives us a predicted yield. And it actually now gives us a range of 206 to 219, and it most likely is 213. This is not a field average. This is the center point of the field. So if you go back to my AdaptN view and I show you this spot right here is pretty close to the center spot, that spot right there would be getting 213 bushel according to field forecasting tool. And oftentimes that's pretty close to average for the field, depending on your neighborhood. In Ashland County and Holmes County, where I live in, this number is actually higher than the field average. But when you get to that spot, it's pretty darn close. And then you could start looking at the math of your historical yield variability to determine where you're at within that field and for that year. The nice thing with this particular prediction is it's directionally correct year over year, meaning that if we have a good year, these numbers are high. If we have a poor year, these numbers are low. So you may not look at that 213 and say, I've got a great crop, I've got a bumper crop this year. No, it just means that it's higher than average. And that's really the safest way to approach that. If it was, instead of 213, if it was 145 or 155, then you would say that it's lower than average by far. You're going to have a terrible year with regard to yield because it's directionally correct. And if it's got a low yield predicted, it means that on average, we're going to be below our historical yield. So that's kind of the safe way to approach that. This is not a grade marker. This is not a guarantee by any means, but it is a good indicator to show you directionally how we are doing year over year. Within the model, and I'm going to move this up so I get a little bit more room, but it's measuring three different nutrients. It's measuring water, nitrogen, and potassium. And it's allowing us to control all three of those nutrients as far as through scenarios and also through the tissue test to calibrate them. And it'll give us information on all three of those nutrients in great detail and in a very visual format. So when I mean visual, it's showing me my stressors up here. So I do not have any significant moisture stress, either drought or excessive water. I have a little bit excessive water out here prior to emergence, but for the most part, it's been a very good year moisture-wise. Nitrogen status is showing me to be deficient from V5 out to VT, which is not too terribly uncommon, but, and I'll get into that when I get to the nitrogen tab. But then I go into responsive. And potassium has been very solid all year. And this is not surprising considering our water moisture status or water status, soil water status is actually very good this year. Potassium needs to be in solution in the soil to be available to the plant, just like any other nutrient. However, potassium is more picky about how much water it gets. So it's got to be, the soil's got to be moist. It's got to be good saturation level. And then that potassium would be available to the plant. It's one of those finicky type nutrients. It's very critically important for the plant, but it acts different than others. Down in the bottom part is a chart that's showing, this is biomass growth in this particular chart. So anything green is in the vegetative state, and this is plant biomass growing. And anything gold is in the reproductive state. So this is grain fill out in this part of this chart. The dark green is what actually happened. And the gray area is what we lost, or we were short on meeting our maximum yield. So this is not anything, for the most part, it's not anything that's going to be done management-wise. There's a lot of other factors that come into that. Nitrogen plays a little bit into this part of it, but most of it is with growing degree units, which I'll click right here. And we've had some moments where it got cooler this year. And solar radiation is another one. So solar radiation being sunlight, you'll see a direct correlation between valleys in our biomass accumulation and our solar radiation. And when we get higher peaks, then we've got more solar radiation. This is a photosynthesis type situation more than anything else. Nitrogen and potassium do play into that, water plays into that, but solar radiation is a one-to-one correlation between biomass growth and grain fill. And that's where this chart really shines on that. Something else we're able to view is rainfall, and we can edit this. So anything in the light blue bars was edited. Anything in the dark blue is just straight out of the computer models. The water is editable because of all the weather models that have been present, and studies have been done on this, is we could model out wind direction, wind speed. We could model out relative humidity and solar radiation, growing degree units very precisely with the information that comes out of all of our modeling and all of our forecasting tools. The one thing that's the most inaccurate from modeling is rainfall. And I'm not saying that rainfall from a model, whether it be like a climate or AdaptN or any of your apps that are on the phone that uses computer modeling, Weather Underground, any of those. I'm not saying that those are inaccurate, but those are most likely to be inaccurate versus the other components of weather information, meaning solar radiation, temperature, wind speed, wind direction, and things of that nature. So this model allows us to correct that and change that if needed. And I did change a few of them here in June. So that just shows that we do have that capability, and it will improve the model's accuracy quite a bit. So when I come in and I look at the individual nutrients, I'm going to look at water as one, and this is soil available water, and down in here. So we full status, full uptake all through the season. This is our daily water status in this middle chart, and it's showing the progression, the up and down movement of soil, daily water status in the soil. And you can see we do have a couple moments we start to get dry, but not too terrible. And then we get out here at the end of the season and we're starting to get a little bit drouthier. And we've seen that, here's the today mark, we've seen that quite a bit over the last couple weeks where it's gotten drier. There in the second full week of August, we did get some rains, and that's played out in these areas here, but not enough to really bring us back into that area of adequate soil moisture. And then it's going to predict out that we're going to be a little bit drier for the rest of the season. Pretty much what we were here at the end of, or very beginning of August. This is a nice chart, decent information. regarding plant growth and development. Our nitrogen status, and like I said, this has been deficient most of the season. The thing about these numbers here is to be fully adequate across the board. I mean, all the way up at this line here, you're shooting for 300 bushel corn. And a lot of parts of our state, 300 bushel corn is very, very difficult to achieve. And what we found in working with tissue tests and yields and different fields is that if we can stay very, very high deficient to responsive in this, we're going to get a solid yield. And that's not a slam on tissue testing. That's critically important, I believe, in managing your nutrient levels of your crop. What it's really, it's saying that these numbers, these colors are not calibrated to be conducive to those yield of our area. So if we get adequate to excessive nitrogen, it will help our yields a little bit, but it's not going to be cost effective to do that. So we manage what we can do. And this year we've been at this range and still looking at 213 bushel in these spots. So not a bad place to be. You always want to stay a little bit hungry, but you don't want to have them starve. And I've seen a lot of tissue tests that would be down in the mid range of this red, and those crops were starving. So these are just a little bit hungry is all they are. And then when I look at potassium, you can see I've got a lot of green, a little bit of yellow and more green. That's very typical when we look at the soil water level that we have through this whole growing season. So that's another thing that's very beneficial and with the soil moisture. And I'm very pleased to see what these potassium numbers are this year. That's great for stalk integrity. And if you walk fields this year, we've seen a lot of very healthy stalks and a lot of good growth out of our plants. Not a lot of height, but a lot of good, solid, healthy plants. So another thing that we could do within field forecasting, besides looking at our statuses, is we could do a little bit of forward planning. And one thing that I really enjoyed using within the model is a multiple scenario. And I did have some in here, and currently they're not showing up yet. So I'm going to go ahead and run one real quick. And I've used blends in the past, and I'm going to stay that way. And it turns out to be a very good one, and it's not showing my blends at this point in time. But I'm going to go ahead and put in just urea. And I'm going to run this. I'm going to run it every 2 days. I'm just going to run this 3 times for a quick little test. And then 75 pounds of product itself. And I'm just going to run that 2 times at 5-pound increments just to show you what this looks like. And it's going to create a matrix. This will be a 2x3, so it should not take very long to run because I'm only running 6 calculations. But I could run a 10x10 if I wanted. So it'd be 10 different rates on 10 different days. And it's giving you a bushel response and a return on investment on that application. And you can see at this stage of the game, we are at 0 bushel response. Well, this is pretty much at R4, R5 at this point in time, not too far away from black layer. And so it's not surprising to have a 0 bushel response. One thing that we can do is we can come in and change our input cost. So if it's cost of product of this would be about 25 cents roughly. I'm just going to throw that number in there because that's ever changing at this point in time. Application cost could be any number of different numbers. I'll put $9 in there. And let's say our corn is at $4.50, which is not current to today's markets, but still, just to show you what we can do. And the numbers actually do change over here. So I'm going to run a scenario for June 28th. And I'm going to run it for urea again. And I'm going to use that same nitrification inhibitor. And I want to come in here, run June 28th at 75 pounds of product and run that. And we'll let it finish off here. And then I'll bring it back in. And once again, June 28th did not have any yield response. So that didn't work as I planned. But this is one tool that we could use. And obviously, when you start to look at this and you start to see some yield responses, which we generally always do if it's run earlier in the season. One real nice feature with the field forecasting tool is to predict out or forecast out applications from a time perspective and a rate perspective to help maximize yield. So what this scenario right here is an early season. This is actually ahead of our top dress application that was made in the first part of June. And so it does not have that additional 125, 150 pounds of product, which would have been about 75 to 100 pounds of N. So what it's showing then is our opportunities for success going out across from June 2nd out to June 29th, and starting at 100 pounds of product per acre up to 235 pounds of product to the acre. The thing that's really beneficial with this is it shows us a yield response for each one of these calculations based on this being 41 bushel increase in yield from a June 27th date application at 175 pounds of product. And I was going to get $47 per acre, assuming that my product cost is 50 cents an acre, my application cost is $10, and my selling price is $3.50. So if you remember back into June, our product cost, and this is the blended total product, not the cost of N. This product cost is about 28 cents per acre, roughly. And I'm just going to keep $10 in there just for kicks and giggles. And I'm going to say that the corn at that point in time, we were in contract out at $5.25. So now my best opportunity is not necessarily the 17th, it's the 20th. I was going to get 42 bushel, but I'm now going to get $160 per acre because my selling price increased and my product cost decreased. Something else I can do with this is I can say, what's my break even? So now if I go with 28 pounds of product or 28 cents per pound of product, $10 application. So I could put in different prices and see what that would bring that down to. So now on the 17th or the 20th, I'm still getting the yield responses, but now I'm down to 34 and 35. So now let me go to $2 and I'm down to 24 and 24. So actually this is be a very economical and profitable application, even if I'm selling corn all the way down to $1.75 a bushel, which at the way the markets are going now, I don't think we'll see that right away. But I could put in what my average contract price is. And let's say it's just $4.75, just throwing numbers out there. And I could say I'm going to be making anywhere from $125 to $127 an acre. I could put a little bit more on because I have the crop capability to do that. And I could be making 160 to 170 roughly, or 163, depending on my timing and my rate. So this has been a very powerful tool, not only for an agronomist perspective on whether or not we're making the right recommendations, but also for the grower to say, yeah, we need to pull the trigger on that. So this has been a very good tool for us to utilize just from that perspective and being able to see the impact we could make on a farm with the right timing and the right rate. So with regard to the model on the field forecasting tool, we can see a lot of things visually, and it's a really good help to understand what's going on with your crop and what are some possibilities on improving yield through nitrogen management, potassium management. If you do have irrigation, what that could look like, and just being able to visualize it and extract the emotion, pull the emotion out of the decision. There's oftentimes, a lot of questions are had in the growing season. Will additional nitrogen or potassium help my crop in yield? And a lot of times it will. But the big burning question is, if I do have an improvement in yield, will I have an improvement to my bottom line? And that's where it gets a little tricky. So we are able to manage our applications, as you can see through here. We could manage our yield predictions and yield estimations, expectations, and look at how we are sitting within our growing season on soil moisture, nitrogen, and potassium. So I did make a comment that we use both Adapt-In and field forecasting tool to improve both models. So this is the number I would use with regard to Adapt-In, and I would adjust my field to, in my recommendations in that yield, to reach up to that 213 bushel. So I'm currently at 185 on average, and I want to adjust that. So I'm going to increase it by 85 and 13 is 30 bushel. And I'm going to increase it, not decrease it, by 30 bushel. And it says it's successful. And now I'm going to go back into my application, and now I can go in and say, will more nitrogen be needed? So by looking at this, then I can go back to that July 28th, and I can run this. And it's going to tell me it's for June 28th, and it's going to go through all the processes here and come up with a new recommendation. So you remember the first one had a 0 for the low, an average of 1, and a high of 30, and a total pounds of N of 29. And that was at 185 bushel. And I'm going to let that keep working. And that's where this number is right here. So as I go through and I keep refreshing, then it'll start populating sometime soon. Do you have any questions, Erica?
I do. So I was going to wait till the end, but I'll just ask you right now, what sort of feedback are you receiving from local producers using the tools?
Initially, a lot of people have skepticism of the model, and I don't blame them, because you know, this is a foreign thought. Every agronomist has their own nitrogen model in their head. And I'm not a full-fledged agronomist. I work at Precision. I work in digital tools, but I work also in the field. And I have boots on the ground, walking fields, working with growers on nitrogen management programs, fertility management in particular, NP and K, sulfur, etc. But once they start to see what these models are bringing them as far as information, and some of the, I guess at first it seems like a strange concept to scale back on pre-plant ammonia or scale back on a citrus application and go back in the field in end of June or July, or we've had a few years where it actually paid to hold off and put 35 or 40 pounds of N on post-tassel. And we saw a tremendous yield bump from that. But just to be able to split their applications even more than they already do is a foreign concept, or maybe a concept they're just not comfortable with. But to see the numbers come up and the return on investment that's possible that comes through field forecasting tool, or to see a scenario run like this through Adapt-In, it does kind of make some, it opens their eyes a little bit. And I've had some growers share with me recently that, you know, they like the tools because the fields that they put these tools into are some of our higher yielding fields. And they weren't always the higher yielding fields. So that's a plus, you know, that there is some return and some response in yield, and also in response to their bottom line, the improvement to their bottom line.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So it did change a little bit with that higher yield. So that's telling me that there's enough residual nitrogen out there to achieve that yield of 235, because I did increase it. So it did change a little bit, and I'm thankful to see that, but still not enough to run out and put more on, because I've already put 265 units of N on this field. So I don't think, or 226 units of N. So I don't think we need to run out and put more on. So that's a positive. Another question I get, Erica, give me a second to frame it up here, but there's been a lot of skepticism within the industry on models too, and it's a matter of managing expectations, like with anything else. And if you come in and say, oh, I'm going to get a 0.8 nitrogen use efficiency on my nitrogen, and because I'm using these models, well, not every year is the same. The nice thing with the models and tracking this information and tracking it real time through the growing season is it's going to share with you that there may be opportunities to succeed with additional nitrogen, but there's also times to not put additional nitrogen on. And one prime example from my history with these tools is in 2016, we were really dry, and we knew we were dry. It didn't take a rocket scientist to walk out in the field and realize it was hard and dry and cracked, and the crop was suffering dramatically. No amount of nitrogen is going to help them. Now that's a pretty in-your-face type decision of, okay, I'm done. I'm not applications. But if you look at the year we had in 2017, where there was a lot of people replanted a couple times because the spring was so wet, and there were a lot of challenges in getting the crop in. But we had a lot of heat that came in July and first part of August, and that really gave the corn a shot in the arm. And we had really high yield predictions. And I'm saying in southern Ashland County, I had some fields that were calling for 230 bushel corn, 240 bushel corn. And that's unheard of, not necessarily unheard of, but it's unlikely that that would have happened, especially when a lot of the corn didn't get planted till the end of May, the very, very first part of June for the last time. And I had more and more people share with me photos and videos of their yield monitors saying, I can't believe this crop is out here. Even though you walk the fields and do your yield checks and everything else, you always underestimate what the actual yield is out there. And to have a model predict out that there is some possibility to achieve higher yield, and we could manage it effectively and effectively both on yield and on pocketbook, but be able to achieve those yields. And that's a nice example I had that kind of showed 2 different years, 2 different extremes, and knowing when to pull the plug and when to push on the pedal. So it does help in the way I said it before, is it removes the emotion from the decision, and may not remove it completely, but it definitely reduces the amount of emotion that goes into making some of these decisions. So with that, you can see that there's a lot of different ways to look at these tools. These are agronomist focused tools. These are not grower facing tools. So it does help to have some agronomic background to on a retailer side to help navigate through these waters. Like I said, these are intensive models on a data input perspective. So a lot of farms don't have that level of time in the growing season to update these with information. I can see some models down the road become more grower or farmer facing, but at this point in time, these are retailer facing tools, and you would need to work with your local agronomist if they have those available to utilize these tools. I don't use these tools myself as a sales tool for nitrogen products. If we need it, we'll put it on, but we may not need it every year. Like I said, I use it as an insight tool, a decision support tool, and something that just helps us understand what's going on in the field in season to make the best decisions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erica.